felek saldın beni cevri cepağa Hey hey felek saldın beni cevri cepağa Derdim bulgaç yıkılap demem sen bir vapağa Derdim bulgaç yıkılap demem sen bir vapağa Derdim bulgaç yıkılap demem sen bir vapağa
Welcome, Window to China. I'm pleased to welcome our special guest, Mr. Winslow Robertson, on the site at the Fairfax Public Access Station, and Mr. Hongxiang on Skype. Can you tell us more why you're engaging in the research on Sino-African affairs?
Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you so much for the question. I used to live in Ghana and Nigeria when I was a small boy for 4 years in Ghana, 3 in Nigeria, and I was always interested in West African history, and I studied that in college. After college, I spent a year in China before getting my master's, and I thought China was fascinating, and there were a lot of things that I felt there that I also felt were in Ghana and Nigeria in terms of the dynamism of the people and an optimism for the future. And when I was getting my master's, which was also going to be in West African history, I decided to incorporate Chinese relations with West African relations at that time, and this is just as China-Africa was becoming a very hot topic. And since that point, I've felt that a lot of the knowledge about China-Africa relations, especially people who want to make money off those relations, has been lacking, and we are trying to fill that knowledge gap. So that's sort of it.
Also interesting, if you trust me, I have done enough research. Your Chinese wife was your student in China for hip-hop dance class. So are you good at it? Tell us more a little bit.
I got a part-time job as a hip-hop dance teacher in China. I was mediocre or bad, but I was very fortunate to get that opportunity, and with that opportunity, one of the people in the class was a lovely young lady who would become my wife, but all the people in my class were older than me and young professionals, so it wasn't like I was preying on high school students or anything like that.
Okay.
And yeah.
I'm sure your wife is lovely. Also, is a Chinese girl. I'm so proud of her. Let's talk about a serious topic. Look at the photo on the Be Alert Ebola. Do you have any analysis? How serious has Ebola caused? How much do Chinese government and the U.S. government to step up on support against Ebola?
So one, keep in mind I'm not a public health expert, so I only have a limited knowledge of Ebola, but I will say this. I feel that the US and China both have been a little slow to respond. The problems with Ebola are mostly relating to broad public health issues, not a narrow disease, but the sort of systems that take care of people. And unfortunately, China and the US have not been investing heavily in those systems, but to China's credit, they've been sending medical teams down there, which are important. And to the US credit, they've been throwing a lot of money and resources a little bit after the fact, but they're trying to go in. However, this is still mostly something that relates to broad public health institutions. And that's something that both countries have to really invest in for the future.
Yeah, I think the first case was found in 1976. Kind of have been a long time, need more research, more funding, to do more work.
They need more funding to do more work, but a good, well-managed hospital system that coordinates with the government could not only help stop Ebola, but other diseases that do more damage and take more lives in these contexts, such as malaria, for example, which is still a massive killer in these countries. And unfortunately, the focus on Ebola, while important, shifts shifts people's gaze away from these broad issues with a disease that I'm probably not going to catch, you're probably not going to catch. It is unfortunately killing too many people in West Africa, but takes a broader based approach. The UN, for example, has $1 billion fund that it wants countries to match. Out of the $1 billion, I think only $100,000 have been donated from Colombia. China and the US are not putting in the resources for a broad, holistic approach to Ebola, and that makes me quite concerned.
Yeah, I think we need to pay attention to these issues. Since you are an Africa-China relations specialist in DC, what is your thought on US perceptions of Chinese engagement in Africa?
Sometimes the perceptions are quite good and nuanced. There's a lot of really talented people in Washington, D.C. who do study China-Africa relations or who work on China-Africa relations in the government or in the private sector or in think tanks. However, a lot of the policymakers in D.C. sometimes view China as a threat, and I don't think China is necessarily a threat to the U.S. They don't compete in the same levels. And there are opportunities for engagement, most notably public health. And even before the Ebola crisis, there were a lot of things that
they can cooperate.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, in terms of PEPFAR, which is seen as an anti-AIDS initiative, but now a broader initiative that has, I don't know, $7 billion a year annually by the US government to tackle some serious disease in Africa. China also has really excellent research in tropical diseases such as malaria, and is also really adept at sending medical teams. It has a long history since 1963 of sending medical teams to Africa, and that is something that they both could cooperate in, but the US might see China as a threat, might not want to push in that direction. On the private sector, it's been my impression that a lot of American companies would take Africa for granted, would take African people for granted, African markets for granted, and rather than go in and set up a store, or go in and try to sell to people in Nigeria or Kenya or South Africa, kind of play a hands-off game. And then when China would come in and they would sell phones or telecommunications equipment, or they would come in contracting for infrastructure projects, American companies would say, oh, the Chinese are kind of coming in and taking these markets unfairly. And I don't particularly believe that. And I think that sometimes China is seen as an excuse for American companies not to engage further in Africa, which I find very troubling, because there's a lot of wonderful people in Africa who have a lot of money who would be very happy to spend money on American products. So the US companies can see China as a threat and a scapegoat, when I don't feel that's the case. And American government and policymakers can sometimes see China as a threat, and that's unfortunately not the case. There are other people who don't see it that way and have very good understandings, but the people who make decisions, I feel that that's a huge barrier to future engagement.
Do you have any suggestions how U.S. business should approach Africa?
American businesses are understandably risk averse and have to answer to shareholders. To approach Africa, you have to think in terms of 5 years or 10 years, not one fiscal quarter. What that means is that after you put in the time, you will get money back. You will get an excellent return on investment. But if you don't take the time to put in the research, to do your homework, and to get good people, there's a lot of fantastic people who can help, but hiring, let's say, a newly minted MBA out of Harvard, while nice, maybe not the person you want, as opposed to a Liberian American or a Nigerian American or a Kenyan American who knows the lay of the land and can help out. And American businesses are hesitant to use the African diaspora in the US, which is an incredible waste of resources, I feel. And if you go in, if American businesses go in, the amount of money they can make, 7 out of 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa, but the population, the ability to create incredible market share, and the loyalty, the brand loyalty. My favorite example is BlackBerry. Nigerians, South Africans still use BlackBerry. Why? Because it's one of the first companies that had serious market penetration in those places. BlackBerry is in the US and Canada not a particularly popular brand, but in certain parts of Africa it still is because of that initial push. And if you're an American company and you want a group of people who have money and who will continue to use that money on your product, a lot of people in Africa who would fill that two criteria.
Right. As you describe the Sino-Africa relations, each group probably take different looks to it. What is your examination how people on the ground in China and in Africa interrupt their relations?
Thank you so much for that question. It's one of my favorite questions to answer. There's a lot of different Chinese actors and a lot of different African actors who engage in both regions. One of the most interesting things that I see is for Chinese people, they view Africa, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them view Africa as a place of opportunity. So if you're an underemployed person in Jiangsu province, you might open up a store in Namibia. You'll move, you'll set up a new life in Namibia, and you'll work hard, and you'll make money, and you'll give yourself a new life to send home. It's a place of opportunity. And in the U.S., where there is still underemployment or unemployment, there's not a young person from Mississippi who's going to go move to Ghana to set up a store, but a young Chinese person would, and that shows, that China is.
Yeah, Mr. Huang on the Skype, that's a good example. We will, talk with him later. Right.
Exactly. There are issues of culture and there are issues of communication, but a lot of Chinese people will view Africa as a place to make money, to give themselves a better life. Sometimes they will interact very well with Africans. They will learn a local language, they will eat the local food, they'll make a lot of friends. On other occasions, they won't. They'll stay with other Chinese people, they'll only eat Chinese food, they'll only watch Chinese TV, and then they'll make their money and go home. It's difficult. In Africa, for Africans in China, same thing. A lot of them are coming in as students, some are coming in as traders in Guangzhou and Yiwu. The traders, they come in, a lot of them have difficult visa situations. They're not going to stay in China for a long time. They're going to go, get their product, put it in a container, and ship it back. People who stay longer might make better relations, might learn Mandarin, and a lot of African students who do live in China speak excellent Mandarin, better Mandarin than I would ever speak. But there are issues of culture and communication, and sometimes Chinese people might look down on Africans. The Ebola situation.
Yeah, I know they sensitive. They love the music, play love with the music, something like that.
Yeah,
probably date with Chinese girls too.
There is a long and complicated history of when African men date Chinese girls and Chinese perceptions about that. Most notably the 88, 89 anti-African protests. That is a long, fraught topic. However, I do think as China becomes a stronger country, a more developed country, and a country that deals with foreigners more, they'll learn to integrate Africans into Chinese society. It's going to take a long time, but it's getting there. I think
Chinese people are very friendly to the international people.
Yeah,
I know you can approve that. I know that. Actually, Chinese people are very open to the world now. So I think we suggest international people go to China to see it. Then different is the world than before, okay? You call for a more measured evaluation of Chinese engagement in Africa despite the incredible amount of infrastructure provided by China. What tools do you think you need to do further evaluation?
So I want to say from the outset that I think China's engagement with Africa on the whole is a good thing and has been a good thing for Chinese and for Africans and for the world. There is a tendency to sometimes overestimate what China's doing, and when China uses the phrase win-win, sometimes it's a win-win, but usually it's one party wins more than the other. So we have to take a more measured evaluation. The tools that we are going to need are we're going to need more on-the-ground research by young PhD students, young master's students, young college students, young civil servants who are on the ground, who are learning more about this relationship, and who are trying to figure out, well, when Xinhua announces a $6 million deal, where does that $6 million go? When Xinhua says it's going to create, 50 jobs in Zambia, does it actually create those jobs?
Right, it's hard to measure that.
It's hard to measure, and I don't begrudge Xinhua or the Global Times for announcing this. That's what they hear, that's what they're told, and they have to report that. And I don't begrudge Chinese people or African people for believing this is going to happen. But what generally happens is people will look at that newspaper report and they'll say, oh, well, this project is for this amount for this many people. And what happens on the ground, and the people who do this find sometimes it doesn't happen that way. Sometimes the money doesn't come through. Sometimes the people aren't hired. Sometimes the materials aren't used the way they should be. Well, essentially we need more on-the-ground research. It's going to take a long time. It's difficult. There's a lot of African countries, a lot of different Chinese people in Africa doing a lot of good things. But that's what's needed. And a big, broad report, they're nice, they're useful, but a journal article, a newly published PhD, or something to that effect, those are the things that are really going to help out. But it's long and they take a lot of time to do, unfortunately.
I saw that, you host like a conference so between the China and the Africa in US. That helps a little bit?
I believe it does. I try to help facilitate events here in DC for people who are interested in the China-Africa relationship. We recently teamed up with African Development Jobs to host just a panel discussion on what China's engagement in Africa means for development, for African development workers. It was helpful. People got to see what's going on. They got to meet the people who are really doing on-the-ground research. So you want to talk to people who have been there, who have seen it, who have done it. Not just people who have signed the contract, but people who have worked with these companies, who have worked on these projects. And what I'm trying to do is help that engagement.
I think discovered fact is also important. What is your view on the motivation of Chinese engagement in Africa? What does that mean? You have said China cannot afford to take Africa for granted.
Well, I believe that China essentially has four main motivations for engaging with Africa: resources, markets, political support, and soft power. The resources a lot of people know about, but the markets a lot of people don't really consider. China views Africa as a place that you can make money, that African people will buy Chinese products. That's a good thing. And that's something that China has been cognizant of. For the political support, you have to look back to 1971, where China took over Taiwan and seat in the United Nations. A lot of that was based on United Nations votes got from African countries. Whenever there's a huge issue that involves China, a big geopolitical issue, a lot of African countries will support China. And China, it's important to appreciates that it has friends over the world. And finally, in terms of soft power, one of the great conundrums that China faces, that the Chinese government faces, is China has become a bigger, stronger, more powerful country, a more developed country. However, a lot of people still don't understand China. They still don't see the world through Chinese eyes, as opposed to the US with Hollywood, with McDonald's. There's a lot of things that go out that promote American soft power. China would like that same benefit of doubt. And that is one of the things that does motivate it engaging with Africa. A lot of people will say maybe China engaged with Africa just for resources. That's not quite the case. There are a lot of complicated reasons why, and I think quite good and rational reasons.
Like you said, we need someone like researchers on the ground. Let's introduce another guest in New York. Hongxiang Huang, founder, director of China House and the China South Dialogue. Hello, 你好.
你好。
Can you say Chinese, please?
你好。
你好。
你怎么样？在纽约吗？
Yes, I'm in New York.
Oh, okay. How do you two of you work together on the Sino-Africa projects?
Well, so since 2011, I have been reporting and researching about Chinese overseas investment as well as the social environmental conflicts. So later I got to know Winslow. He has been very helpful, very intelligent. So we work together we talk on podcasts. And right now he's actually helping us China House with the strategic planning about how to move forward. So we know each other for a long time, though we just met in person in DC.
How well does he do his work?
Well, of course.
Okay, based on the article, you launched the China House in 2014, Africa's first nonprofit organization focused on Chinese investment in Africa. What is the mission of China House?
Well, so in my reporting and researching, I found out like with Chinese investment, of course, potentially it's good for China and for Africa, but there are many challenges facing Chinese overseas investments. So our idea is to create a Chinese civil society actor, like an NGO or a social enterprise, to better help the Chinese integrate into Africa, to reduce the social and environmental conflicts of Chinese overseas investment there. So as China House, we help Chinese companies do some research about how to invest better. We help them design and run corporate social responsibility program to improve their relationship with the local development. We also organize a lot of like China-Africa partnership on youth exchange, wildlife protection, and so on. We just try to make the China-Africa relationship develop more healthier. That's our mission.
What the passion you got from? So what makes you to be involved in very actively?
Well, I would say 3 years ago when I first got into this China-Africa area, it was by accident. My friend in like South America, they told me, oh, we have many Chinese in our country and they are doing all kinds of things, oil, hydropower. So I got interested as a journalist. I went there to just have a look, and I found out there are many things going on and there are many challenges. So I have been writing about that. And then from reporting, I more turned into writing. And then from writing, I want to try to do more things that I could help. So that's how everything comes out to this.
I think you are really curious or brave. You have been twice in South America alone to explore the reasons behind the conflict in the enterprise development. What have you found out?
Well, so I went twice to Ecuador, twice to Peru, and twice to Brazil. The most important thing I found out is there are huge conflicts regarding environment and labor to the Chinese investment there. And in many cases, Chinese companies, they are not doing worse than non-Chinese foreign companies there in terms of environmental practice or labor practice at all. But usually they have the most severe conflicts with the local people. And I realized one of the big difference between those Chinese companies and the US company, Canadian companies, is the huge communication gap. Chinese companies, they are usually worse than those non-Chinese foreign actors in integrating into local society, in communicating with media, in understand what is local NGO and how you work with them. So usually a lot of their conflict is due to the information and communication gap. And as a journalist, I feel there's a lot of things that from the communication side, if it's improved, it's going to be much better. For example, Huang in Peru, researchers found out their labor practice is not worse than other mining companies there, but their labor relationship is the most intense one in Peru.
How do you apply for this on your job? That means you write articles to show the people what you do.
Well, usually I went there, I did research, I talked to people, I talked to the local government, NGO, Chinese company, Chinese embassy, and I just wrote reporting articles, especially in China, just to let more people know what's going on with there, try to like bridge the information gap. And right now, of course, I have been trying to more to speak out because as a Chinese with international background, sometimes I know what's going on with the Chinese side, what those people are thinking, and I understand what the non-Chinese side, how the international world, like NGO, media, how they work. So I try to speak to the both sides about what's going on with the other side.
I know we need you on the ground, need other peoples too. So you said Chinese companies operate abroad in Africa. They need to improve their image, but they don't know how to do it. Any suggestions? What is their economic situation?
Well, the economic situations, well, a lot of the Chinese investment, they fail or they run into obstacle because they don't know how to integrate into local society. So with the environmental and labor and media relationship and community relationship, they make less money than they could have made. And in terms of like, they don't know how to improve their image. I have several examples. For example, there's one Chinese mining company in Peru. They told me at the beginning, they would talk to international and local media. But later they realized no matter what you tell them, they are always going to write something bad about you. So later they decide they're not going to talk to any foreign media at all, which actually make the reporting about them worse. They don't understand internationally how media works and how you cannot view media as a propaganda machine. So they don't really know how to communicate with them. And they also say they have done a lot on corporate responsibility as well. They say they donated a school, maybe they plant some trees. But although Chinese companies, they have been trying to do good things overseas, they usually don't know how to do it right. They don't know how to have better communication with the outside world to let people understand and appreciate what they are doing.
You both of you join us, then I think I understand how difficult the Chinese companies oversee as complex as Africa-China issues. Thank you for joining us, and then see you next time. Bye-bye. Window to China and Xinyu One has reached out to the hundreds of Chinese community, Asian community, and American community on performance, interview in education, politics, culture, etc. It's a link for all the communities. Xinyu and Judy Wu, the publisher AC Business, are making joint efforts to promote the program on Newspaper Weekly. Window to China and Xinyu One is a 30 minutes long English program. It will be available on YouTube, Facebook, Google+, AC Business News by keywords Window to China and Xinyu One.